Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'll just let a couple more people file in before we really get started here. So I'm Megan Coelho, I'm the president of Advice Chaser. And before we introduce our guests and get going, I need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed financial advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. So we're very excited to bring you this educational presentation. Attendees are muted, but we encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. The presenters will answer those questions during or after the webinar today as appropriate. If you ask a question in the chat box, go ahead and leave your contact information as well, so that if we don't get to your question, we can make sure that someone reaches out to you after the event. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. So now I'll go ahead and introduce you to today's panelists. We have Chase Tusshouse here today. Chase, give us a little wave so we know who you are. He's a partner and CEO of Tusshouse Wealth Management. Prior to becoming a financial advisor, Chase worked in the manufacturing industry as an engineer for L3 Harris and SpaceX. Chase graduated from the University of San Diego with a Bachelor of Arts and Science degrees in Industrial and Systems Engineering. He's a member of the University of San Diego Alumni Board, the co-chair of USD's School of Engineering Alumni Council, and a member of the Oceanside Theater Company Board of Directors. He and his wife spend their free time mentoring local youth. So we also have Win Tran. Hey, Win. He came to the US as a 2-year-old immigrant with his family. He attended Cal Poly Pomona, majoring in finance and marketing. Win has worked in the financial services industry since 2004. And to better service his clients, he started Win Wealth Solutions in 2016 as an independent financial planning firm that partners up with some of the best solutions providers across multiple industries. His team covers a broad range of financial planning and helps clients take care of what's important so they can spend more time doing the things that they love. We also have Debbie Elder here today. Debbie is one of the nation's leaders in motivating students to be peak performers. Her varied background includes running the disciplinary unit at the Calgary Young Offender Center as a therapeutic foster parent, a homeschooler, college planner, and after-school program director. She currently owns the Shady Oaks Primary School, and she loves to share her incredible knowledge in simple steps that can be implemented immediately. She has experience speaking to students, teachers, corporate America, entrepreneurs, and people who want to be successful at life. So now I'll go ahead and hand over the microphone to Win, who's going to begin our agenda. Today, we're going to be covering insurance needs, retirement, college planning, and preschool and elementary school planning. So Chase is going to cover insurance needs and retirement. I keep messing up your names. I'm sorry. Win is going to be covering insurance needs and retirement. Chase is going to be covering college planning. And Debbie will be talking to us about preschool and elementary school planning. So go ahead, Win, take it away.
Good morning there, everyone. There's some risks that come with parenting here. So now that you're in charge of another human being, if something was to happen to you, how would your family be taken care of? So typically, a lot of people use life insurance for that. So you're looking at some people with whether they're covered from work or you buy on your own. So I tell a lot of my clients this: check how much you have from work and to see if there's going to be some gaps you need to cover. Everybody's going to be ranging a little bit differently on this. So some people like to cover between 8 to 12 times their income, or they like to cover 3 things that's important to them, like their mortgage and debt, taking care of their funding for living expenses, and leaving behind money for, like, say, some college or some other wishes they may have. So there's a lot of different products that can fund that. You can do term insurance, whole life, UL, those different type of insurances. All really comes down to what your budget is and what you want to have covered. And so it makes sense for a lot of folks to even do the second part, is if they do have some insurance, it's just to check the beneficiaries, make sure that's up to date, that you have your child on there and your spouse, whatnot. So then make sure they're covered too. So there's not an issue where you forgot to update it and now the state's going to be dealing with determining who's going to receive the money. So, and then we'll go into the next part here. I believe Chase, you're up next with the, oh no, sorry, that's the retirement planning. For retirement planning, it all really comes down to like checking to where you're at right now. So I usually have clients take a quick snapshot of what they have in their IRAs and their 401ks and figure out how much you're putting away. That's going to be vary from each person to person. Some people are putting away the bare minimum, and others are putting away 20, 30%. On average, you should be putting away about 20% altogether to kind of cover, like, based on your living needs, like retirement, whether it's 60 to 65 range. But you should really just talk to a financial planner and look at your situation and see how much you can reasonably afford, because you're going to have all these new expenses coming in. So, well, now I'm going to pass it on to Chase. Sorry about that.
Before you pass it on to Chase, we do have a question here, and that is, what are some of the considerations that people should have about how much insurance they should get and when they should get it? Is this something that we should wait until, children are a certain age, or is this something that, it's best to start even before you get pregnant?
Well, I should typically have people get it to where they're either pregnant or before, just because the cost of insurance increases as you get older. And once you're through the 3rd trimester, typically most insurance companies will not cover you at that point. So you have to apply before the 3rd trimester, just because they want to make sure you give birth, you're healthy, and then they'll insure you. So if you're waiting too long during that pregnancy, they're typically not going to underwrite you until afterwards. And
Got
a
it.
lot of folks will end up getting at that time a 20-year policy to make sure the child is covered till at least 18.
So is there a rule of thumb about, what size of an insurance policy that you should have based on, who's working, or, if someone's planning to, if one parent is planning to stay home with a child, what is there some kind of formula that people should be using to consider how much insurance to have?
Somewhat. There's a human life value one, and that's going to range from 10 to 20 times. So it's typically a little bit more out of people's budgets, because that's factoring your lifetime income over the next 10 to 20 years, but not including taxes. So that's why with a lot of folks, I'll use how much is your living expenses going to be? You got to figure to cover that. And let's say for every $250,000, that'll spit out about $1,000 a month, tax-free for the next 15 to 20 years or so. And of course, if you invested, maybe it gets a little longer or whatnot. But a lot of folks cover between 8 to 12 times their income. And if their income's a little higher, they may look into, say, leaving extra money behind for bequests, such as college funding, taking care of the mortgage. But it really comes down to the budget and how much they want to cover for that situation.
Mm-hmm. Got it. What about parents who have disabilities? Is there are there special considerations they should have about, if one parent is partially disabled what type of insurance they can get and what type of insurance they should make a priority.
Okay, if they're getting money from SSI there, you're gonna have to only get a term policy because any cash value is gonna be included into the asset under holding, whatnot. So I don't know if that's gonna affect your benefits, but if you're getting from a disability policy, the funding from that, then that won't matter. But you should theoretically do the same thing with the formula where it's gonna be either 8 to 12 or covering certain needs for the period of time.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions right now, so Chase, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me. So yeah, so as a new parent planning for the future, probably one of the biggest stresses you've already encountered is how to pay for education, right? College education just seems like it's never ending, going through the roof. So what are some things that we can do now to help plan for that? So first of all, I mean, we all want the best for our children, right? But we shouldn't necessarily sacrifice our entire retirement to get there. But with some thorough planning, I believe that you can find the best fit for your student and for your wallet. So it's important to understand how those educational expenses and goals fit into that overall financial plan. So as we kind of get into this, there's a few things, some terminology, and really a simple formula that I want to describe up front. And so the first part of that is understanding the sticker price to college, or what we call the cost of attendance. So this is what, if you go online, you might see that a specific university says it would cost to attend their university, tuition, books, housing, board, all that. So that's not, the good news is you won't always necessarily pay that amount, but that's where we need to start. And we hope that we can, as we understand our expected family contribution, we can get to a point where then we get to the true cost of college. So the next part, expected family contribution, this is the student's contribution plus the parent's contribution. And that's what equals the expected family contribution. So the formula really to figure out what the financial need is your cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution. So that's why it's important to create a budget up front and determine what you can afford for college. Is kind of similar to buying a home, right? You wouldn't necessarily just go out and say like, this is the biggest and best, so I'm going to buy it. We need to know up front how much can we afford. So in doing that, there's kind of two phases to college planning. There is the saving for college and the paying for college. So the saving part kind of lasts for those 0 to 14 years of age of your student. And then the paying is sort of the high school years, as now we're going to start prepping and figuring out, like, are there scholarship opportunities? What specifically, what university does my son or daughter want to go to? So first, the savings phase of college planning, this is where we're looking at starting 529 plans, potentially UTMAs, even taxable accounts if that's how you choose to save, and then figuring out the budgeting contributions. How much can I be setting aside, again, in the perspective of the larger financial plan towards college expenses? So that's the first part. The accumulation certainly makes, if you can do well in the saving for college part, it certainly helps the paying for college phase, makes that a lot easier, right? And so what is that phase? This is where your student is taking the necessary entrance exams, preparing themselves to be a desired applicant for the school that they want to attend. On the finance side, we want to be prepping for the FAFSA. And there's actually, so the FAFSA is used by a majority of all schools. It's primarily used in the, I guess, the public school world, where there is a private school version, the CSS profile. And that is, there's a few differences between the two, but this is where that expected family contribution is determined. So a lot of that, they're asking for, okay, they want to understand your income, your assets, And from here, schools are then going to be able to understand what your financial need is. And then at that point, we can apply for grants and scholarships, and then even determine if loans are financially reasonable for us to take out. So I will say, just to highlight the FAFSA and the CSS profile, the big difference is that the FAFSA, we're looking a little bit more focused on income. So the way that works, it's collecting a lot of information from you, like earned income, college savings vehicles, taxable investment accounts, real estate investments, not including your personal residence. And then where the CSS profile, we're looking at more of the assets. So your personal residence might be included in something like that. So how do you prepare for something, knowing that you do need to apply for the FAFSA? There's a way to certainly present yourself so that you can come out of that with more financial need than you otherwise would. And another important piece about the FAFSA is that they call it the prior year. So they look 2 years back at your taxes then. And so that's what the information they're taking to determine what your financial need would be. So we can go on to the next slide here. So 529 plans. So now we talked a little bit in the last slide about that paying for college phase, highlighted the saving, but the number one tool that we kind of look at, just without really understanding specific financial scenarios for you and your family, the 529 plan is a pretty easy, tax efficient way to save towards college. So the way it kind of works is, you're going to make contributions. You're going to then have, as that money grows, tax-free withdrawals on qualified higher education expenses. So what's a qualified higher education expense? That could be tuition, fees, books, supplies, any kind of equipment, room and board. And so this is, as long as you kind of fit into that realm, it gives you a lot of flexibility to pay for these educational expenses. And the nice thing is, if you have maybe multiple children and the oldest goes and they get a full ride scholarship, or they have a majority of their education paid for, there's a lot of flexibility to then transfer that 529 assets to the next child. So in general, is it perfect? Obviously, not. You're kind of limited at times to what you can actually invest in. So your investment options, each state has its own sponsored 529 plan. So it's just about looking at not only your state, but maybe some other states, and seeing, what the best fit might be.
So Chase, we have a question, and that is, tell us more about contributing to the plan. Is there a minimum amount? Is there a maximum amount that you can put in per year? How does that work with the 529?
Yeah, so you kind of have two options. There's two sort of strategies there. One is the monthly contributions, right? Where you might say, hey, we can afford to put X amount per month, or maybe even one time per year into a 529 plan. Not necessarily any sort of limitations there. And then another strategy is also, and this is where we see more often with grandparents, that they might want to contribute a lump sum toward their grandchild's education. Well, they could start a 529 plan. They could contribute, 100,000, let's just say. And then for them, they have, over the next 5 years, for the grandparents, they can break that contribution up so that they're still within the gift tax exemption. But then now the student and owner of the 529 plan, you have the flexibility or the opportunity now really to take that lump sum and let it grow over those 5 years, rather than breaking them up into 5 separate contributions. So a few different strategies there. Really just kind of depends again on, what you can afford, what the budget allows for, and how much you want to be saving towards college.
Got it. So another question also about the 529 plan is, can it be used, is it only allowed to be used on college, or can it be used for a private high school or a private elementary school?
Yeah, great question. So you can use it on K through 12 tuition expenses. There are some limitations there, I believe, but yeah, you can use that on expenses as long as they're qualified expenses. You could potentially use it towards tuition on K2, excuse me, on K through 12 education.
Very nice. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So if there's no more questions, I'll pass it on to Debbie.
Thank you, Chase.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about thinking about what you want walking out your door at 18. And I think that's a great place to start as you are welcoming these new children into your family, to really put some thought into that. You know, we would never attend a meeting or come to an event like this without some sort of agenda, without some sort of planning, yet so many of us parent every day like it's a brand new day. And so I would really encourage you as new parents to take some time and sit down and really think about what you want. And I know for me and my husband, we were very clear on our expectations, and it really allowed us to make those big decisions. And then the little ones were really easy. Does it get me to my goal or not? And that allowed us to have a really clear path for both of our daughters. When you're looking at elementary and preschool, start with preschool. If you're trying to discern which preschool is best for your child, there's some things I want you to be aware of. It's not appropriate for a preschool to screen your child academically before entrance. So if you're running into that and the schools in your area, I would highly recommend that you continue looking. When you're looking at preschool, that's the time where children learn through play, where they're introduced to social and emotional relationships, strengthening those types of needs, and also learning to begin some self-awareness practices. That's really what you're looking for at a good preschool. By the time they hit kindergarten, they start working on their letters and their sound recognition and all of that. But initial clear preschool, which is your 3-year-old through 4-year-old, is really about developing those social expectations and relationships and starting to understand what it means to sit in circle time, to go to school, to meet new friends. All of those are really key and important factors for being conscientious citizens as they grow up. Looking at the cost between public and private, of course, public is free. I will tell you, as a member of the state of Texas, we are on track this year to lose 66% of our educators. It's just gotten that difficult for them to stay for both financial reasons and for some of the, well, in their words, very ridiculous regulations on what they have to do. We've seen with COVID and the pandemic, teachers are really being squeezed to meet expectations that are going to help their students to overcome the last 2 years of disrupted education, but they're just not very viable. So something to keep in mind. What you're going to get from a private school, it is very different, for example, than a public school, is a more individualized education, and also an opportunity as the parent to partner with the educators. I know for us at our school, that's really important. We see ourselves as part of a team that works with you and your family to develop your child. You are the expert on your child, and we are here as educators to serve you in that regard. And I think knowing what you want from an educational perspective, and if you're not sure, you know, you can reach out to myself or any of the other educators you might know and have those conversations, so that when you're going in and you're making a decision and interviewing different schools, you're asking relevant questions that really can help you to make a decision what's going to be best for your child. I know at my school, it's really important that our students have a say in whether or not they attend our school. So we do, which is very common in the educational world, a shadow day where the student comes and spends a day with us. And they might leave going, Mom, I love that school. I can't wait to start. Or they might not feel they fit in. And I think they need to have some say in that. And giving voice and choice to our students is very, very important. There are some costs associated with private schooling, and they range all over the board. So that's something that you really need to look at. And if you're clear on what you want, you know, I'm not a big believer in I can't afford this. It's all about prioritization. And as Chase just explained to you, if you have a 529, you can start using that as early as kindergarten to start to augment the payments that you make for private school. You really want to make sure that you're laying down a very solid educational platform for your students. years ago in 2019, I did a TED Talk, and we spoke about the 6 pillars of education. I'm going to share those with you because they really will help you, I think, to formulate what's important to you in this educational path. So number 1 is the ability to connect. You know, we know as we move forward and how quickly the world is changing with technology that we can't predict today what jobs your children are going to have when it's time for them to enter the workforce. But we do know that they're always going to have to get along with others and be able to connect to be successful. The next is they're going to need to be able to communicate both written, orally, and visually to communicate with others that they have to work with and they have to associate with. Then they need to be able to collaborate. Collaboration is a skill that needs to be taught. It's very different than cooperation. In collaboration, you need to show up very aware of what your skill sets are so that you can contribute that to the group. So you have to back it up and make sure you have strong self-awareness. You're looking for an elementary school that will help you and your child to develop those skill sets. I had the opportunity to be a college planner for a number of years, and I had left my own schools. I had 15 middle and high schools to get into college planning. And I kind of walked out of my little educational bubble, if you will, and stepped into working with students in the Houston area that had come from other private schools and public schools. And what was remarkable to me and a little bit disappointing was the lack of self-awareness. Here were these kids going off to school, college, $60,000 of their parents' money, and they couldn't answer some very simple questions about themselves, their habits, and their likes and dislikes. So just be aware of the importance of that. The next is being able to be creative. We want our children to be able to think, to be very also critical thinkers, right? We teach our students here to think of questions that Google can't answer. I want you to think outside the box. I want you to really have the opportunity to think through something and be able to break down the steps. And then lastly, our 6th pillar is to be able to problem solve and to give your student an educational environment where those are both endorsed and included and valued. And I think asking the right questions when you go in to speak to the administrators can really help you to narrow down that field. We can go to the next slide, please, Megan. There we go. So when we talk about preschool, there's some simple guidelines. You know, can they follow directions? Can they handle being away from you for short periods of a time? Are they able to focus on task? And then there's basic, usually schools will have self-care and potty training expectations, and then social readiness. So these are things that we've really noticed a big problem with during COVID, right? So a lot of our students right now that are between the ages of 3 and 5 are very socially stunted at this point because they haven't had the opportunity. So be gentle with your children, be aware, have conversation. When they get in the car at the end of the day, be able to ask questions. One of the things I did when I taught preschool is I put stickers on the children's t-shirts so that their parents could ask a very specific question to engage in conversation. When you're 4, and your mom says to you, what'd you do today? Or how was your day at school? That's a big chunk of hours to discuss. It's really hard. It's almost overwhelming. But if you were to say, hey, tell me about playing in the sandbox, you're like, okay, that I can do. Or what book did you read today? It's also really helpful to be able to partner with the teachers if you know what they're working on. And it's not uncommon in preschool for them to do different themes. So in the beginning of the school year, they'll talk about community helpers, the firemen, the policemen. If you know that that's what's coming and it's a simple question to the teacher, you can start to have those specific conversations with your child prior to them entering school, which allows them that sense of confidence and a feeling that they can contribute when the teacher is talking about it. When I explained this to my daughters when they were very young, I said, you know, girls, it's like in your brain, you have a secretary and she's not very good. And so we've got to help her build files. So when you hear information, you can put it in the right place so that you can retrieve the information when you need it. And part of that is getting the brain ready so that it can learn. So if you think of a farmer who walks out into their field and just throws a bunch of seeds out there, do you think anything's going to grow? Some may, but imagine if the farmer was to till the ground and water it and fertilize it and then throw out the seeds. Now we've got a really good chance of growing some beautiful fruits and vegetables. Well, it's the same with our brain. And if we don't get that brain ready, if we don't get it cultivated and prepared for learning so that we can put the information in the proper file, it kind of spins around and slips out your ear. That's what happens. So we need to help make the learning very, very sticky. The other thing you want to look at when you're looking at both elementary and middle and high schools is, are the students being prepared for lifelong learning? What we're seeing, and I saw it often when I had my after school program, is the students are told to go home and study, but nobody's teaching them how to study. So there's specific things that you need to do, whether it's pre-reading or how to read a textbook or how to follow an article online that does just that. It gets the brain ready to absorb that information so that the learning is efficient and effective. It's important that when you're learning new information that it travels sort of through your body. So it has all these sticky points. So one of the things that I was looking for, didn't find, which is why I homeschooled, but I was looking in that time when my daughters were going into elementary school for a school that taught sort of strategies for success, both in and out of the classroom. So those are some things that I would really encourage you to think about. It's probably not what you think about when you're looking at trying to determine a school for your child, but in this sort of age that we live in now, I think it's very important that you diversify what you expect from your school and that you come alongside the educators and support them in their challenges with your child, and also so that the learning can happen together. And the languaging between the home and the school should be very similar. And that really helps for the child to know expectations. One of the things that we do here is the first 2 weeks of school, we don't teach anything academic. We're very clear at that point during that time on expectations so that the students can be guided to self-regulate. Once you have your behaviors in line, it's much easier to learn. The idea at the end of those 2 weeks is, I know that you know the rules. And if you break a rule, then it's by choice. And so it really allows us to sort of set up what we want and to establish a culture of learning within our campus walls. So that makes a big difference. We can go to the next slide, please, Megan. So we want to look at some other things. I've noticed and watched when students come to school, often they haven't had breakfast, and we live in a very affluent neighborhood. It's either they're not hungry or they were rushed in the morning, but that success of being properly fed and watered, if you will, before you show up is really important. So nutrition is very, very important. We also, I know at our school, have a policy of no fast food and no Lunchables. We're very careful about what goes into the body. It's really hard to teach a student who's nodding off and falling asleep in the afternoon because they ate all this processed food for lunch. They need to make sure they have plenty of rest before they come and that there's plenty of time to be outdoors. We do a lot of our teaching outdoors, and we spend up to an hour and a half outside during play for recess each and every day. And that allows these young bodies to move. So when they come into class, most of their wiggles are gone. Not all of them. We have a lot of little boys that are still pretty wiggly, but it really helps for them. And it gives them an opportunity to really learn a lot of conflict resolution skills, because that's where the conflict is happening, is on the playground, not really necessarily in the classroom. So success skills are something that I want you to really be aware of when you start to interview these different teachers and educators, and make sure that the schools that you're looking at are really promoting social and emotional intelligence, because that's what's going to set your child apart from their competition. And it's never too young to start preparing for project-based learning, to making sure that your students know how to manage their time, how to manage their projects, how to study effectively and efficiently, and where they're spending time each day reviewing different skill sets. So we have a no homework policy at our school, but I still expect our students to review their spelling words, to practice their math facts. So it's important when the child gets home that you have some regular routines that will allow them to develop those great study skills, so they're not sort of being slammed by that when they hit high school. I know I worked with a lot of students who didn't really, well, one of the myths I heard is they would tell me all the time that your first year of high school doesn't count for your GPA. Yeah, not true. And so making sure that they have those skills before they get to high school, because the minute you step on that high school campus, the clock's ticking, and the last thing you want to do is close doors that you want to get into for your higher level college training. So is there any questions, Megan, that have come up that I can help you with?
Yeah, there is one question, and that was about preschool. Someone was asking, what are some of the questions when they're looking for a preschool? What are some questions that they should ask when they go speak to a school before they do a tour?
Okay, so disciplinary strategies or policies is one place to ask. Our school, for example, is a nurtured heart school. And what that means is if you look at behavior as a line, when students are above the line, usually very little is said. But the minute they step over the line and do something wrong, that's when all the energy comes out. And so you really want a place that's going to turn that upside down, where your student, your child is going to be appreciated for the greatness that they have. And every time they show that greatness, it is verbally acknowledged, right? And it's not just, hey, good job. I don't want attaboys. You want real descriptive languaging that allows the child to learn. Oh, so when they say to put the blocks away, and I go do that, I know exactly what the recipe is because my teacher told me that she loved the way I put the blue box in the blue bin and the yellow box in the yellow bin. And I did it quietly and I did it quickly and I did it without being asked. Now this student, your child, has a recipe to repeat. They know exactly what to do. And that self-regulation and helping them through those types of things, teaching them about sharing and getting along with other students, being gentle in their way, making sure they're getting to know your child. One of the things that I did when I taught preschool, Megan, was I took the 5 love languages and I determined which love language each of my child adapted to and was more comfortable with. And then I made the effort to talk to them in their language, because what that does is it quickly increases your ability to communicate. So using all the strategies that are available are really, really helpful. And make sure that when you're talking to the teachers that one, they have a heart and a love for what they're doing, and that they're able to leave their personal issues and life at the door before they walk into school, that they're in it to win it for your child, that they will advocate for them, and that they'll work closely with you. That communication between home and school is really, really important. And also I think it's important as a parent to observe before you put your child into the classroom. And if they're not comfortable with you observing, you need to run, because that's a big tell. So just make sure you're putting some time in beforehand and do your due diligence, talk to other parents. And I remember when my daughters were that 1 year in public school and we were thinking of continuing before we changed our mind and homeschooled, I asked other parents. So at that point, we had an opportunity to select which teacher our children would have. So I would talk to other parents and find out what teachers they liked. But you have to go a step further, right? So if you're talking maybe at your child's Gymboree class to the other parents about where they're thinking of sending their child to preschool, ask some really specific questions, right? It's not one thing to ask why, but then to dig a little deeper. I know one of the parents I distinctly remember talking to and was ranting and just loved this one teacher. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. What do you like about her? She goes, oh, she gave my child so much homework. I just thought that was so good for practice. And I'm like, okay, I'm not a big believer in homework, but if I hadn't asked that one more question, I would have possibly put my child into a situation or an environment that I didn't necessarily agree with. So making sure you've got really good questions to ask that resonate with what you and your spouse are looking for in raising your children. You want to make sure you're aligned so that you're both trying to get to the same destination with your education and your home life.
Got it. Got it. There's one more question for you, Debbie. And that was, what if my child doesn't meet all these qualifications that you mentioned for being ready for preschool? What should next steps be if we get to age 3 and it's just not there?
So I think making sure that your child is socialized is really, really important. Hence why we've had so much difficulty during this pandemic with the students that we're now meeting who are 3. They are literally 2 years behind. And we're watching it. Our sister school is across the street. It's a preschool. It works with 3 through kindergarten age children. And I've had several conversations with the director there, and they have spent a lot of time this year working on, like I mentioned earlier, self-regulation, social cues, understanding facial expression, using your words instead of your body to make your point, right? At that age, using them to identify and articulate what they want, as opposed to screaming or yelling for it or just taking it. Making sure you're working with educators who, it's important to tell the child what to do, not what not to do. So you want to hear things like walking feet, please, instead of stop running. So you stop running, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do, right? So it's important that the languaging of where you're looking at is there. So being able to prepare your child with those types of guidelines prior to applying to schools will be very helpful. And I'm happy to talk with anyone that might have questions about what are some things that are helpful with that. And it's, get away from the screen, have play dates, spend time in situations where you can observe your child and help them learn the words that they need to use, and to use their words in conversation when they're playing with others, to understand the give and take of relationships, even as young as 3 years old.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we actually have a couple more questions. This one is actually for Wynn. Someone asked, what's the difference between term and whole life insurance? And are there pros and cons for parents when choosing between them?
Right. The difference between term and whole life is term is a temporary insurance, typically for 5, 10, 15, 20 years or more. It's a low cost, very inexpensive there, but only for that time period. Then after that time period, the cost jumps up. Whole life is more of a permanent policy, but the cost is significantly more, and it can be designed for a minimal cost for an extended period of time, so say 60 years, or you can overfund it for like as much cash value as you can. So it really comes down to fitting to that budget of like, do you want something more permanent or temporary, and does it fit your budget?
Got it. That makes sense. And then someone also asked, like, where do IULs fit in that conversation between term and whole life, or is that something completely different?
It's kind of like the hybrid in between there. So with whole life, you're putting the guarantees on the insurance company to price it properly to where it needs to last to the end of that, say 100 or 121. The IUL typically has an increased cost of insurance over time, but on some companies, they have a little more upside on their gains, because whole life is like, say, 3 to 4% fixed. Maybe they have some dividends to get 5 or 6. But with the index UL, you follow an index, and that's where you're kind of getting a little more tricky things. So now the returns might be 0 1 year, 3% next year, but typically there's also a guarantee in there at some point. But the cost of insurance can go up. And so hopefully you fund it properly where the policy doesn't lapse at, say, age 60 or 70 or 80 or whatnot. So
Got it. Got it. Okay. Sounds complicated. And I have another question for Chase as well. Someone wanted to know when is the appropriate time to start working on the FAFSA?
Yeah, so I believe the FAFSA, you start this would be a better question for college counselor. I think it's the sophomore year, sophomore or junior year, as you're starting to apply to schools, but it's around that time. So really, you want to be preparing a few years beforehand. So kind of in your 8th grade, when your students in the 8th grade going into freshman year, knowing that that's the tax years that they're going to be looking at. What are things that you can start doing to prepare then? I mean, doesn't relate to all of us, but the example I give is that, if you were to sell your business in that year, you would have this huge increase in income for that 1 year. Well, when you apply for FAFSA and it looks back at that year, then colleges are going to look like, well, look, you have all this money, like you should be able to afford this. Well, that might have been for 1 year, and then after that, your income might drop or your assets might drop, or you might use that money for other things, right? So it's important, as you're approaching that 2-year look back, to start planning then and figure out, obviously don't let the tail wag the dog. Like, if don't let, just your educational goals make everything else turn, right? So So take it all into consideration, but that's kind of the timeline that you want to be looking into FAFSA and the CSS profile.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, that's all the questions that we have today. Unless you guys have anything to add, I'll go ahead and wrap things up. Did you guys all cover what you wanted to cover today?
That's great. Thank you.
It was really helpful. Definitely a lot of great information for me to absorb. And on behalf of Advice Chaser, we want to thank all three of you, Wynn, Chase, and Debbie, as well as the organizations that have helped us work to bring you this webinar today. We appreciate each of our attendees. You can look for an email soon with a link to the replay of this event, and you're welcome to share that replay with friends and family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you to find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. You can find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you at another webinar soon.